A few months ago, I made these exquisitely detailed N-scale vehicles from GHQ's white metal kits. And in this three-part series, I'm going to show you three different painting techniques that I use to build these tiny but highly detailed vehicles for my N-scale model railroad, using spray paint for the Chevy van, simple paintbrush for the forklift, and airbrush for the white truck. Today's episode is about the Chevy van. For this one, I use spray paint as the main painting process. So without wasting any more time, let me show you how I build this tiny but awesome miniature van. We'll start with what seems to be the easiest build, the Chevy panel van. Maybe it is a little difficult to see it on the video, but there are some exquisite details that you can see in this truck. The grille is finely detailed. You can actually see the vents, the wipers, the door panels. So I have a feeling that this particular build might not be as easy as it looks. To separate the tires, all you need is a little bit of twist and a slight pull, and they come right off the sprue. Now, before anything, the first step is definitely to clean the model. Now, these castings are surprisingly clean. Honestly, I feel that I can pretty much go ahead and start painting it. I do see some very fine sheen lines for the mold joints. So first step is going to be to clean those out before I move on to painting. For the basic cleanup, I'm going to use my own microfiles that I make using toothpick and fine grit sandpapers. If you want to know how I make this, you can check out the video that is appearing in the card right now, where I made a barge out of styrene and made this, shown how I make these microfiles that can do really fine cleanups. If there are any need for any larger cleanup, I might use my 6-file set. But looking at how nicely cast these white metal kits are, I doubt that I will really need to use them except possibly in 1 or 2 occasions. I used 5-minute epoxy to glue the wheels. The assembly is a breeze for this model since there are just these 4 wheels to attach. It's a nice design where the little square peg on the wheel slots tightly into the notch on the chassis of the vehicle. Once all wheels are fixed, I lightly press the model on the flat surface of my cutting mat to make sure that the model is level and I don't necessarily have a dancing car on a parade on my layout. I used a little bit of blue tack to secure a pair of chopsticks as a handle to help me with the painting job. It might look trivial, but a good handle makes a lot of difference while making a model. Once I was satisfied, I dabbed a little isopropyl alcohol on a cotton bud and cleaned up the surface to prepare it for painting. All good painting job starts with a good coat of primer. Here I'm using Rust-Oleum flat black primer. I shook the can thoroughly and sprayed the model all over and left it for a day to cure. Once the primer cured, I started masking the parts that don't require paint, mainly the windshield and the windows. This is 6mm Tamiya masking tape. Given the boxy shape of the model, it is relatively painless to mask the areas, but given this is 1:160, you need to pay extra attention to accuracy. So I took my time and checked everything twice. Notice that I'm doing overlapping masking to doubly assure that there is no leak. I covered the front grille, the wheels, the bumpers, and the roof. For the base paint, I chose forest green, an irritating green color that is so terrible that I hardly have any use for it. As the paint dried, I removed the masking tapes. With 2 colors to show the contrast, you can start seeing the details of this model. Because I was overcautious with masking, the spray paint didn't cover some essential parts which ought to be painted in the same color using a paintbrush. So, how do you use a paintbrush to apply paint from a bottle of spray can? I took a narrow food container and started spraying the paint at the inside corner of the container. Right after the first coat saturated the surface, the liquid paint started accumulating at the corner. The paint can now be applied with a paintbrush. Neat, huh? When I show the zoomed-in first-person view, it is often difficult to understand how tiny these models actually are. So here is a second-person view of me painting the fine lines. Yes, those high-power magnifiers give you hell of a headache afterwards, but is essential to achieve good results. Now we turn this little block of metal into a proper automobile by adding some chrome. Given the spray paints used for real vehicles possibly give the best chrome effect, I decided to use the same method as before to extract some chrome paint in liquid form by spraying it in a narrow food container. I took my trusted 2x0 Raphael Super Detail brush and started painting the front grille. I tried to be as precise as I can be while painting those tiny little details. Once done with the front of the vehicle, I painted the back bumper guard, back of the folded side mirrors, the handles, and all four of the wheel caps. Clearly, the addition of chrome changes the whole appearance of the vehicle dramatically. For the turning lights, I decided to forage into my wife's calligraphy supply and nicked a very expensive bottle of copper color. And yes, I did wait till she had left the house to do this part. I took a few drops and used my trusted ultra detail brush to carefully paint all the turning lights. The natural shine of the paint and microscopic particles in it automatically gives it the Fresnel glass type shine that you see in such installations. Not to mention that I put the bottle back before she returned, and she'll only know about this when this video is published. For the tail light, I chose red enamel paint and applied in a very concentrated state to retain as much shine as possible. For the windscreen and the glass windows, I kept them black. I was pretty happy with the look at this point, so I decided that it's time to seal everything down using Testors Tall Coat lacquer before starting with weathering. Notice that I avoided the dull coat on the shiny parts to retain their shine. As the lacquer dried, you can see that it also flattened the surface nicely. Under high magnification, you might have noticed some irregularities on the painted surface before, but with lacquer being completely cured, the surface is now smooth and flat. This is another great reason to use lacquers to seal off a paint job. The model really looks nice, but that unnatural look of the glass kept bothering me. I wanted something to simulate glass better than flat black paint. I chose ultra-thin clear acetate sheet, which is also known as OHP or overhead projector sheet. I took a marker, marked out the dimensions directly off the model, and cut the pieces carefully using my precision scissors. That came free with my Swiss knife. I needed 4 different shapes. 2 rectangular for the main window on the driver and passenger side seats, 2 triangular shapes for the quarter glass, also known as the vent windows, 2 square glass with rounded corners for the glass on the rear door, and finally the windshield, with the contour made for the wipers which are already cast between the hood and the windshield. To attach these little glass pieces, I used Testors Model Master Clear Part Cement and Window Maker. Now, because of the size and the fact that I had to fix the pieces on solid surface, I decided to apply a thin coat of it on the entire inside surface and just press it on. Overall, it worked okay, but once the glue dried, it did leave some light webbing on the underside of the glass. It didn't create a lot of issue in this case since I had to turn this into a weathered vehicle after all. However, if I have to do it again, I'd rather use a thin strip of ultra clear 5-minute epoxy to hold these clear glass components in place rather than filling up the space with glue. I also applied the gel on the tail light, the indicators, and the headlight to simulate the shiny plastic cover of these components. We are almost there, barring some finer detailing and weathering. To accentuate the doors and joints, I used Humbrol black enamel wash. I used my detail brush to apply it as precisely as possible on the lines. Once the wash was dry to touch, I took my tester's enamel thinner and started removing the excess from the edges and blend the remaining to create subtle aging. Finally, I took a cotton swab to lightly rub on the surface to remove any further excess. I want to specifically call out on the layers of paints and how it worked. The spray paints are acrylic, and though it is called enamel thinner, the mineral oil in the thinner also thins acrylic. So had I used this technique directly on the paint job, it would have ruined the model even though the base and the wash are different types of paints. The dull coat lacquer creates a strong layer which gives the paint underneath complete protection from both acrylic and enamel thinners. The only thing that can screw it up would be a lacquer thinner which will react to the protection itself. Now for the final touches, I decided to go for dry pastels, which I call poor man's weathering powder. I use a hobby knife to scrape fine dust out of the sticks in a container. Notice that I'm not creating rust, but I'm creating dust. So I used a combination of gray, raw sienna, yellow ochre, and white. I mix all four pigments to create a natural city dust tone. I start with the roof because that's where you expect to see most dust settling. Then I work through the sides using downward strokes which simulate tiny streaking due to rain, etc., and then dust accumulation again on top of the streaking, denoting that this vehicle hasn't run in a while. I also make sure to add some dust on the windshield and the glass surfaces. To simulate dust accumulation on top of mud that the vehicle collected, I dabbed some mix with a cotton swab on the wheels and to areas near the ground. I continued with the brush and the swab till I was happy with the dusty look. To seal everything down, I used a light coat of dull coat lacquer, trying to avoid the shinier parts as much as possible. Finally, here you have it. The dirty old van suitable for a dirty old town. Though I possibly would be doing some of the things differently if I were to build this again, overall I'm really happy with how this turned out. For an N-scale vehicle, I think this little van has amazing definitions and details. Look at this, the van can barely compete with a 1-cent coin in size and yet has all its turning indicators and chrome handles. So, which of these techniques will you be using for your vehicles or white metal kits? Do you have a better way of achieving similar details? Let me know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like and share this video if you found this interesting. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is a 3-part series, and in the coming 2 episodes, I'll be talking about 2 more vehicles and will show various techniques to achieve some great details even in a scale as small as 1:160. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and you guys are awesome.